Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the second training session of the USPWC-Paklaunch Accelerator for Women Entrepreneurs. My name is Aksom Zaheer. I will be your trainer today. So just a little bit of background. I am a lawyer based in Pakistan, and we basically specialize in helping startups with their legal needs. So our firm name is StartupLawnch, and the entire process and the entire reasoning behind this specialization is because as you know, the startups in Pakistan, they don't really know what their legal rights are and how to and what to do when they're starting out, especially. So it's a very volatile, as the market is already so volatile, but obviously navigating the legal landscape takes time and it's a bit tricky. So that's where we come in, just to help you with your incorporations, helping you fundraise, all your corporate governance, and at the same time agreements. So let's just start. I do have a presentation prepared, so I will just share my screen and then we can start that. All right, so let me just present this, sorry. All right, so now today's training topic is basically structuring your business for the long term and understanding the legal and regulatory framework in Pakistan mainly. So now all of you are startup founders and all of you are entrepreneurs. And so being a founder means, well, as you all know, it means a lot of things, right? So you are the person that is responsible for your business, for your startup, and all aspects of it. So having said that, I do not expect a startup founder to be trained in all their legal knowledge, having all the requisite maybe financials, marketing, development ideas, business structuring. So obviously, because it's not a jack all in one trade. So, but at the same time, so you should have your a basic legal knowledge about what your business is. What are so let's say if you're fundraising, right? If your cap table is diluting, if you're transferring your shares in your company, what all of that means. So, like I said, I don't expect all of you to become legal professionals and know all of that, but at the same time, having basic knowledge is a good start for any startup founder. Now, the first step that comes in is always that people ask, okay, why? Why should we incorporate? Why should we incorporate our business? Why should we do anything like that? Why should we even be regulated if we're just starting out? So, first of all, obviously, if there's more than one co-founder, it will divide the equity split between the founders from the very first get-go, right? So if it's what will it be? Like if it's two co-founders, generally what the norm is that yes, 50-50 is being divided. If it's three people, 33.3 across the board, right? So it's an equal split that happens. But obviously that is something it's always important to write down. It's always important to have it defined. And it's always important to go that. Then at the same time, your roles and responsibilities between you and your co-founders get defined. They get legitimized. Then at the same time, once you incorporate a startup, the biggest benefit that you get is that your own personal liability, your personal assets, everything that you have, they are protected. So everything is separate. So what we will stress upon this point later on in the training. So at the same time, now incorporating a startup gives you responsibility. It makes you have ownership of what you're creating. It brings that responsibility aspect that you're doing, something serious that you're doing. It legitimizes your business with your customers, with your vendors, with the people that you're working with your employees. So being a legitimate incorporated entity will only help you. Then the finances. So it will create a divide between your own personal revenue and your personal accounts and your business revenue. So it's always good to have those two streams separate, right? Because you don't want them to be mixed. You don't want the business revenue to be mixed in your personal accounts because that is just going to get messy as your business grows, right? Keeping track of every rupee that's flowing in and out of your account will get a logistical nightmare. Incorporating your startup with the biggest, and then another benefit is that you can have your bank account opened with your under the company name. So you can get bank support if you want to get even apply for credit, loans, all of that stuff comes in. Your financial history gets created. And then obviously, the biggest thing, your brand, whatever brand that you are creating, it may be it a product, be it a website, be it a service that you are offering through your business, that brand will start creating value. It will become its own entity that will. And then obviously the most important aspect that every startup needs to know, that investors will only invest in you if you're incorporated. Now, in terms of incorporated, what type of, so now the other question comes in, that what should we incorporate as, right? So what is the right and proper structure for our business? So choosing the right structure is the very first step that you're taking as a business owner, as a startup entrepreneur, as a founder. Now you don't want to get stuck with the wrong type of business as well. So, and then obviously in a country like Pakistan, and actually in other jurisdictions as well, where there are more than one types of businesses, you want to ensure that you pick the right one. So the very first basic type of incorporation style is a sole proprietorship, which is registered with the FBR, the Federal Board of Revenue. But at the same time, the biggest drawback in a sole proprietorship is that there is no protection of limited liability, and you cannot have more than one founder, right? More than one shareholder or owner in the business. So it will be 100% owned by one person. The next step we're going to talk about is partnership, or it's also referred to as an association of persons. Now, the partnership is registered with the registrar of firms. Once again, it is not a separate legal entity. It does not offer the protection of limited liability, but obviously more than one person can enter into a partnership firm, and the process is not too complicated. You draft a partnership deed between the partners, and then you get incorporated. The next is a limited liability partnership, LLP. Now, the limited liability partnership was introduced by the Security and Exchange Commission of Pakistan in 2017, and this was basically the answer of an upgrade to what your general and how your partnership looks like. So it gave the protection of limited liability. So before I move to the other two partnership structures, I'm just going to talk a little bit about limited liability and the biggest protection that it offers. So limited liability, whenever a company or private limited, which offers a limited liability protection, and so does an LLP and LLC abroad as well. So the biggest protection in that is that, so let's say your business has its certain number of assets, and in your capacity as a founder, you have a lot of different assets in your name. Let's say you have maybe different bank accounts, you have a couple of real estate assets in your name, but they're in your name. So if anything were to go wrong tomorrow, let's say with the company, so only the assets that are owned by the company, only the debtors or the banks, so they can only, or maybe your investors, right? So they can only reach in and only get their return from the assets of the company. So let's say your company has assets worth, let's say 1 crore only, and your personal assets are maybe let's say 50 crore. Let's just assume that. So in that situation, whoever the debtor or the creditor in that situation is, they will only be able to recover from that 1 crore of your company assets. So your own personal assets are safe. So your liability is limited till the company, right? So that's the biggest protection that is provided by limited liability companies. So moving on is a single member company. So this is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan as well. And this is basically an upgrade to a sole proprietorship. So the first thing being the first common thing being with a sole proprietorship is that you can only have 100% single shareholder in an SMC company. But at the same time, it offers you the protection of limited liability as well. So let's say if you're a solo founder, this is one of the best routes for you to go ahead with being a single member company. You get the protection of limited liability. Private limited company, an investor will not invest in you. They will not, because obviously at the same time, because if an investor is investing in you, if they're becoming shareholder in your company, if they're becoming an owner in your company, the investor also wants to protect his own personal assets. And he can only do so if it's a limited liability company, right? And so and obviously he cannot invest in a single member company because you can't have legally, you cannot have more than one shareholder. In a private limited company, the minimum requirements 2 shareholders, and then 2 directors, and then you can go up all the way to 50 shareholders in the private limited company. So I won't, obviously, just for the basic purpose of this talk, I won't be focusing on public listed companies or unlisted or public companies. All right, so now we've looked at the why, we've looked at the what, and now let's go on the how to incorporate your company. So, and this is something that we also will not go too much detail. So now in terms of company, so we're only going to discuss like your single member company and your private limited company, which are incorporated with the Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan. So the very first step is that you apply for your name reservation. So whatever company name that you have, so let's say you are, we'll take the example of, let's say, Paklaunch, right? So Paklaunch wants to incorporate the company. So what the name of that they've thought about, there is Pak Startups or Paklaunch, let's say, keep that name. So they'll apply for a name reservation. So once your name is, and provided that the name that you're applying for, that is not it does not sound similar to any other already existing company. It is not infringing upon their rights for their name. Then your name will be reserved for a number of 60 days, 60, with the SECP. And in that 60 days, nobody can come and like reserve the similar name that you've already reserved. So in that 60 days, you have to file your documents for company corporation. So obviously all of your shareholder details, like your the equity split, what are the percentage of the number of shares that you're taking, your CNIC, your personal information, like your name, address, all of that stuff. And then after that, once you're filling out the relevant forms, you will go on to create your memorandum and articles of association. Now, these are your company constitution, your company bylaws. Now, the memorandum of association is an important document because depending on what you are doing, let's say maybe you're an e-commerce business, so you want your memorandum to reflect that what you're doing. You're an IT company, so you want your memorandum to reflect that you're an IT business, right? So the scope of business, the activities that the business will be doing has to be reflected in the memorandum of association, along with what is the total authorized capital of the company, what is the paid up capital of the company, and so on. And then the articles of association will discuss it will discuss things about, like, what your board of directors looks like. If you want to transfer shares, what will be the quorum of your directors meeting or shareholder meeting? What is the process of transferring of shares? What is the process of including new shareholders in the company, right? So, and the exit process as well. So all of that stuff. So the good thing is that now SECP has created drafts of both memorandum of association and articles of association, which are publicly available on the SECP website, that anybody can go in after this talk. I will be sharing the relevant link with you guys for that resource. So that's something that's a good benefit, that anybody can go and you can just whatever the relevant business is, you guys can see that and you can download that, and then you can also get in touch with either a lawyer or SECP themselves directly, and just answering your questions. Then obviously after that, once everything is prepared, all the documents are there, you prepared your company constitutions, you've created your bylaws, everything. So you submit the application, then hopefully if there are no further objections from the SECP at all, they will incorporate your company. And that's a very big step that you have entered into and completed. All right, so like I said, so we're talking about private limited companies just because of the reason, because investors, because the end goal of your startup and the first end goal of your startup is to raise investment. And as I mentioned earlier, no investor will invest in you unless you are a private limited company. So this is, like I said, this is a very important stage that comes into every startup. So it's something that you cannot bypass. And something that any good angel investor or VC, they will not invest in you if you're not a private limited company. So let's talk about these. So the advantages of a private limited company. So first of all, as I already mentioned, the private limited company is a separate legal entity. It is a body corporate. It is an artificial person in the eyes of the law. So for example, let's say now two people have created a private limited company. So it's going to be person A, person B, and then the company, right? So it's going to be three people. So the company is its own separate person. What it means is that the company can enter into contracts with people. It can enter into it can hold assets, it can own assets, and the company can do stuff on its own. It can it can own IP, intellectual property, and all that stuff. Limited liability now is the second protection and advantages. So we've already mentioned a little bit liability, so I won't stress too much on that. So just to recap, that your own personal assets are safe and every your liability is limited till the company. Two or more shareholders, that's another advantage. So obviously, so the minimum as per law, as per Pakistan Companies Act 2017, so you need a minimum of two shareholders, and then obviously a maximum of 50 shareholders can be in a private limited company. Then if you want to transfer your shares, if you want to bring in other people, if you want to bring in investors, if you want to increase your number of shareholders, then that entire transfer process is actually very straightforward. It's simple, and all of that can now be done online with the with your SCCP company portal that you get once you incorporate. So all of that can be done and obviously whoever your advisor, lawyers are, they take care of all of this process. And then the last but not least is fundraising. That, like I said, I will once again stress upon the point that the investor will not invest in you guys if you're not a private limited company. So you will have to get this now. A practical example is that if anybody is in, like in 3 or 4 years, so they made a requirement that every startup coming and incubating in the National Incubation Center, they have, by the end of the cycle, they have to register a private limited company. So that's something that they've made. So that's something that you have to do. All right. So just now looking about, obviously now a lot of people, a lot of startups that we talk to, a lot of startups that we work with, so they get a little bit they get a little bit stressed when you tell them that you have to incorporate your company with the SECB. So they get worried. So in that situation, so now, and the biggest aspect and the biggest challenge is obviously keeping up with the statutory compliances as per the law and as per the SECB. So to be honest, this is a lot of hearsay and people just get scared. But actually, but if you're serious about doing a business, this shouldn't be a big problem for you, right? Because this is things that come with your business. These are things that come hand in hand that you will have to take care of if you're a serious entrepreneur, if you're a serious founder. So some of the post-incorporation compliances, the first one is that your annual general meeting. So the first one has to happen within 16 months of your incorporation. And then every year you need to have an annual general meeting, which will be a meeting between you and your shareholders, right? So obviously in the beginning, it's just going to be you and your co-founder. So it won't be, but as you grow on, as you get investors on board, as you get more shareholders on board, this is a compliance that you have to meet every year. And there's no way around it unless you're a single member company. You have to appoint your auditor. But now, first of all, so this is only applicable on companies which have a paid up capital of 1 million rupees and above. Any change in your company that's happening before your EGM, if anybody else is being appointed as director, as a chief executive officer, if there's any ownership of shares are being transferred, so that has to be reported as well. Then at the same time, you have to file your audited financial statement. But once again, these are mandatory on companies with paid up capital of 10 million and above. So by the same time, investors, when you're invested, they do want to, even if your paid up capital is less than 10 million, just because of meeting this and because of all of these public documents and for information sharing, you are still required by investors to file the stuff with the SECP, and there's no harm in that. There's nothing. It's just something that will help you in the future as well. And then obviously providing record to the SECB for the record of ultimate beneficial owners of the company. So whoever owns 25% and above in a company is classified as a UBO. So you have to report that. So if your company is owned by, let's say, another company, right? So of that company that has shareholding in your company, so who are the UBOs of that? Who are the people that hold 25% shares above in that company? So that is something that you have to report with the SECB. All right, so holding companies and holdco. So this is something that obviously that's very important in the life cycle of a startup. That once you are investing, once you're getting investment ready, so this is something that as you may have heard, a lot of startups are doing already. So they're creating holding companies abroad, and now it does become daunting for some people that, how will we incorporate it in, like, let's say outside of Pakistan, what will it do? What is the right incorporation jurisdiction for us? Where should we incorporate our company? And once again, what are the advantages and disadvantages that come with every jurisdiction? So to understand a holding company, first you need to understand what a holdco is, right? So it's basically a company that owns your operating company, right? Be it in Pakistan or be it in any other jurisdiction. So a holding company is a company that will eventually end up owning the majority stake in your operating company. So in one way, a holdco acts as a ownership vehicle or a vehicle of ownership for your opco, right? So now the setup. So why holdcos? So holdcos are created especially so now some of the popular startup and investment jurisdictions for holdcos are Singapore, Delaware, Dubai, or the anywhere in the UAE. Saudi is now becoming also a jurisdiction, and then obviously British Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands. So these are popular in jurisdiction where companies are setting up, Pakistani startup companies are setting up their holding companies. So the setup and the entire purpose of these holding companies is so they can raise investment abroad, right? So obviously now in a country you want to raise investment and you want to park your capital, which it has a strong regulatory framework, right? Your capital controls are good. You're being provided tax benefits of one sort of the other, and then at the same time with the current political climate in Pakistan, as everybody's aware, so bringing money into Pakistan, especially if you're raising in dollars, then you are not allowed to bring money in Pakistan and then hold it in dollars. So even though yes, companies are allowed to open up foreign currency accounts, but with the current climate, it's something that's very difficult. That it's not being awarded. The state bank is not giving permission to that. So that's a big reason why you want to set up your holdco in a foreign jurisdiction. So let's say in Singapore, where you will be allowed to hold whatever investment you raise, you will be allowed to have that investment in dollars. So that's a bigger reason. So now the startup founders in that situation, what they do is that the startup founders and so they will have ownership in the holding company of whatever the equity ownership between them is. So let's say 50, 60, 40, whatever there is, right? Then the investors, once they invest in you, so they will invest in you, they will transmit their capital investment to the holding company relevant bank account, be it in Singapore, be it in Delaware, be it in Dubai or BVI. And then the investors will get shares in the holding company. Now, the holding company will then, once everything has happened or during that process, the holding company will now own shares in the Pakistani company OPCO. So the Pakistani company, for our purposes that we've been talking about, we have been talking about a private limited company. So the structure is that the holding company either comes in and holds 99% share, acquires 99% shares in the Pakistan company, or 99.9% shares in the Pakistan company, and the 0.1 or the 1% is then held by a Pakistani founder. Why? Because as I mentioned before, as per the law, you need a minimum of 2 shareholders in a private limited company, and the reason and the benefit for a startup founder to have one person in the operating company is better for obviously for your banking purposes. So you want to sign your checks, you want to still have some control, and then obviously it's easier KYC for the banks, right? For to give to somebody who's on ground. So you want to have the operation, and that one person is just that helps there as well. So now, when to incorporate your holding company? That's the biggest question that's asked. So when do we just, let's say we're just starting our investment raising, and do we start operating? Do we incorporate a holding company right on the get-go? No. So my advice is that you should always incorporate your holding company once you have at least a few, maybe one, if not one, or maybe a few commitments locked in from your investors. Maybe you have a term sheet signed, you were then like that commitment has come in, the term sheet has been signed, or maybe like your transaction documents are being signed. So because of opening up a holding company, the most minimum in maybe Singapore will cost you around 5,000 US dollars. And then obviously the cost slowly goes up. So it is time consuming. It is costly as well. So you want to ensure that when you are raising investment, when you have a few commitments locked in place, that's when you want to set up your holding company. You don't want to do it the day you open up your opco and you've only been in operation for like let's say you only do it when you are raising investment, because otherwise there's no point in like wasting that capital and wasting that having a high burn rate just because of that. And obviously at the same time, why waste your time in that? So, and then obviously once the holding company owns the operating company, so whatever investment you raise and whatever investment you've parked in the holding company, now the question comes in that, okay, now we've raised investment, but how do we bring that investment back to Pakistan? So the holding company owning the operating company. So you basically the biggest the capital that you need is your operating expenditure. So companies either on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, so they just have their monthly expenditure or quarterly operating expenditure just remitted to the Pakistani company in OPCO for obviously payment of rent, employee salaries, sourcing of product, vendors, and XYZ, whatever your business is, right? So that's what you do. All right, so just to recap before we talk a little bit about corporate governance. So what we've discussed is that we've discussed opening up the right company structure. We've discussed about what are the advantages of a private limited company, when, why, and where should you, we've talked about like where, why, and when you should incorporate a holdco. Now, the biggest aspect for companies is corporate governance. Now, corporate governance is basically, it's a system of rules, practices, processes in which a company is directed and controlled. Now, the word control, I believe, can be a bit scary for founders because when they talk about control, they know that that when it comes to control, investors are also in there. So the question comes in, who will be controlling the company? Who will be operating the company? And the biggest fear that I believe founders do have that that they're afraid to give up control in the company because they're like, if it's something that we created, we don't want to give it up. But that's something that comes with time. Corporate governance is something that will help your company reach the next level. It will build trust with your investors, with whatever your vendors, your community, your customers, and whoever and whatever the public official that you're working with, right? So now the principles of corporate governance. Now, first of all, transparency. So very simple, very basic to understand that the board of directors, that basically every information, your financial performances of your company, they're all transparent, that they're being shared with their shareholders, they're being shared with your investors. And then at the same time, your shareholders know what's happening in the company, right? Management, risk management. So what are the risk management, what are the risks like in your business, right? What are the risks going forward? So how to mitigate those risks, how to manage those risks, right? So that's something that comes with it. Fairness. So now the board of directors. So the board of directors is basically over there to protect the best interest of the shareholders and of the company, right? So in fairness, you want to like your shareholders and your employees and key management, everybody's treated fairly. Accountability. Now, as I mentioned before, now being the startup founder means you're in charge of a lot of things. So every person, every company, every board, every founder should be held accountable for what they do in the company, right? So it's not like you're just a lone cowboy and you're just going on and doing whatever it pleases you. You will be, once you have raised an investment, once you have gotten VCs or angels on board, you will be held accountable for the stuff that you are doing. Now, moving on to the components of corporate governance. Now, something that's, once again, so we talked about principles, so now the components that come with corporate governance. Now, corporate governance, the reason why I'm stressing so much upon this is that a lot of startups do not have any corporate governance, even when they have raised capital. So that's something that is something that's severely lacking in Pakistani startups and a lot of startups even across the globe as well, right? Because at the same time, like startup has so much to do, but so this is the biggest aspect that's always sidelined in their startup life cycle. So board of directors, right? So the founders, the very first board of directors in your company will be you and your founder, right? And then, but obviously, once you raise capital, once you raise investment, your investor will then obviously, depending on whatever the terms are, they may want a board seat in your company, which honestly is not, it may sound scary, but it's not a bad thing. Investor wanting a board seat in your company it's actually a good thing because at the same time that investor probably has experience that they're bringing on board that they can give to the company and they can help the company in making strategic decisions and making good financial strategies and way forward, and then you can take it forward. So it has to be accountable, and your transparency is, and the way the board of directors meeting is being held transparent, that every meeting that you have, you should have recorded in your minutes of meeting, and then that should be circulated between you and your shareholders. Now, committees. So the committees is a different aspect. It can either come under the board of directors or it can be separate committees. Basically, in that situation, so for example, so now you raise investment, you have founders, you have a board of directors, you have advisors on board, and you have different employees and different key management people. So a committee for that could be a compensation committee. Like you want to have a committee which sets out what are your salaries for the month, what everybody will be having, what people will be, what the costing of all that. There can be a risk management committee, a roles and responsibility you want to have your yearly financial plan. What are the next investment round that you want to take? How do you want to budget for that? What are the capital that you've already raised? How are you going to budget for that in the whatever your projected plan is, right? What's your runway? How good does your runway look? So that's something that you want to be and make it confident. So documents and procedures, another important aspect of once your company is growing, you're a body corporate, you're increasing, your employees increasing. So documents and procedures, some things that could come in there is, for example, employee handbooks, right? If you're, let's say, if you're a fintech startup, right? What is the financial transaction process, right? If you're EMI startup like Sada Pay or Nea Pay, what is your financial transaction process? Or maybe let's say you're e-commerce, right? What is your entire user journey in that e-commerce? How does the user get a refund if there's a problem with that? How do they make a payment, right? And then at the same time, you want to have your HR manuals in your company. You want to have those process and policies in place. And then last but not least is your data protection. Now, being that how many startups coming on board, how many data, and obviously be collected from users. So you want to ensure that that data is being protected of all consumers, users, even your own internal data is being protected and it's not being leaked. So you want to have necessary protocols in place, right? You want to have your proper agreements in place and all that. And then management, the next component. So, once again, I'm again going to stress upon the fact that founders play a critical role in the success of the company, right? So the investors will be investing in you. They're investing in you as founders. So because 9 out of 10 founders will have the same idea of the startup, right? But obviously the execution of those 9 out of 10 people will be different. So the investor will be investing purely on obviously the idea is there, the business is there, all that, but at the end of the day, the decision comes in, okay, who are the founders? Are the founders mature enough? Do they know? Can they structure their business and going forward? And at the same time, then how do you structure your management as you're raising capital? Who do you decide is going to be the CTO? Who is going to be this chief financial officer? Who's going to be the chief operating officer, etc.? How are you going to be issuing ESOP to them, right? So what is the later on hierarchy structure, right? Underneath. So all of that comes under corporate governance. So all of these things are in there. All right. So before we go on intellectual property, so we just like said, so we're gonna talk. So we're just a little bit recap again. We have talked about company incorporating your company, incorporating your holdco, corporate governance, and now obviously, so the next part is the importance of intellectual property. So this is something that we won't go into much detail because this is an entirely different wing in legal structuring as it goes. But at the same time, you want to ensure that whatever brand you are building, right? So whatever brand, whatever your logo is, whatever your content that you are creating, let's say maybe you're a clothing brand. So you will be known by your logo and by your name. So that would come under trademark registration. You want to ensure that your trademark is protected. It's registered. And so just to ensure that other people don't come and start copying your logo, they don't come start copying your brand name. And if you're, let's say, if you are a magazine startup, right? You're an e-commerce startup, or maybe you're like an online magazine. So all the content that you are publishing online, right? So that will come under copyright registration. Like you want to ensure that all of the content, all of the literary work, everything that you're generating is your copyright, is not. And patent registration is something obviously which a lot of people are interested in at a lot of times, but not everybody meets the eligibility criteria for a patent. Because first, a patent will be registered is, let's say you have a completely new product doesn't exist in the world, then you apply for a patent. And then let's say if there's an existing invention in the world and you bring in some new improvement in that existing invention, then you are also eligible to file a patent. But obviously, the process of filing a patent is very long, it's stringent, and not everybody gets it. So moving on to the trademark, the importance of trademark. So like I said, we won't talk too much about that. So the governing law is the Trademark Ordinance 2001, the trademark rules in 2004, and the governing body where you get your intellectual property and register is the Intellectual Property Organization, Pakistan. So who can own a trademark or who can apply for trademark? So any individual or sole proprietor, any partnership firm, or any company, LLP, and not. So be a company being like, as I mentioned, separate legal entities. So it's always good for your startup and your company to own the intellectual property, because at the end of the day, because like I said, once the investors are investing in you, they are getting shareholder in the company. They will not want the intellectual property to be held or owned by a single individual founder. They will want the company to own that intellectual property, because let's say if there's some dispute, just to say later on, so and the founder exits, so at least he doesn't exit with the intellectual property, right? Because to secure the investment, to have all that stuff, you want to ensure that the company owns intellectual property. Now, obviously, the advantage is everybody knows. No third party can come and claim your business, or they can come and claim that this is our brand, what we're doing. It gives you an exclusive right to that product, to that brand that you're building. And at the same time, your intellectual property is one of the most core aspects of your business. So this is something you want to protect from the very first start. Now, in Pakistan, the getting your certificate for, let's say, a trademark, it takes around 12 to 18 months. So you don't want to delay that. If your logo is finalized, if your name of your business is finalized, if your brand is finalized, you want to get that application with the intellectual property organization as soon as you can, right? Because to get that certificate will take time. So you want to ensure that you're always on the ready. You're doing it on the get-go. All right, so now one of the most important stages of your startup cycle, of your company cycle, is now how to raise capital. Now, there are a lot of other ways to be prepared. So because since this training is based, it has more of a legal aspect, so I won't talk a lot about the other aspects, for example, your financials, your projected plans, your ROIs, and all of that, your growth mechanics and measures. So now how to raise capital. So you want to ensure, first of all, as everybody knows, you want to have your pitch deck ready. You want to know, okay, how much equity you are giving out in that round. What is your business plan? What are you asking for? Who are the founders? You want to explain all of that in your pitch deck. Now, and obviously while you're doing that and while you're getting ready to raise capital and raise investment, you want to sort out your legal and financial obligations. Are you incorporated? Have you set out your financial, have you created a financial projected plan? In your incorporation, have you met with all the legal statutory requirements? If you're a post-revenue startup, are you paying your taxes on time, right? So you want to make sure that all that is ready. Now, obviously, you want to value your startup. What is your startup valued at? At what stage are you? Are you at a pre-seed stage? Are you at a seed stage? Where is your valuation? Because depending on that valuation, it will be very important and depending on how much you're raising, that will determine how much equity you are giving out in that round. So you want to ensure that. And then you also want to any good startup always plans for the next 2 to 3 rounds, right? They know that in the next 2 to 3 rounds, and then based on whatever the valuation or whatever the projections they're getting, based on that, they see that, okay, if we're going to be giving out, let's say 10% in the first round, then obviously as the valuation increases in the second round, we might be giving out maybe 8% of the company, right? Or maybe 6%, and so on. So you always want to plan ahead. Due diligence. You want to ensure that your due diligence is ready, because every investor that will come on board, they will conduct a due diligence in your company just to ensure all your financials are matching up, your legals are in order, your compliances are in place, everything in place is there. Now, Investor due diligence, this is something that a lot of startups do not do. And I've seen a lot of startups don't even get advised this. So a lot of startups, they blindly follow an investor's capital and the money they're offering, and then blindly take that investment. So you want to ensure that you as a startup founder, you conduct due diligence in your investor. You see that the person that's offering you whatever amount of capital they are, who is that person? What sector do they belong to? Do they have experience in, like, the sector or in the type of business that you're bringing? Can they bring more strategic value to your company? And maybe if the capital is enough, but apart from that, let's say maybe can they get you into meeting with other future, like, for your business and expanding your business and introducing to more people. And then at the same time, if that investor has a history of investing in other startups, it's always good to reach out to those startups and just talk to them candidly, like, hey, we just want to ask about this investor. How is this guy as an investor for you? You just want to have the investor due diligence. And last but not least, timing. Timing always matters. So when you're raising capital, you always want to ensure that you're doing it at the right time and you're not rushing into it. You're not your valuation, if your valuation is too low, you might end up giving away too much equity. Let's assume your company is valued right now at $1 million, and you say that you need to raise $500,000, $500,000. So with that valuation, not technically, you are actually giving out 50% of your company. Now, in the very first step, do you want to do that? Do you want to give away 50% of your company to an investor, right? Because that's something very tricky. Then obviously, at the same, so in that situation, I think that will keep going each startup's life. All right. So now raising investment and the types of investment models. So I'm sure you are already aware about a lot of them. So we're just going to talk about them in a little bit of detail. So direct equity investment, also called a priced round, is where the investor gives you capital, and in return of that capital, you award in shares. And the transaction document is a shareholding agreement or a share subscription agreement, and or. So that's how direct equity investment works. I give you capital, you give me shares. The next is a safe investment. A SAFE now stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. Now, safe notes or safe agreements have become very popular in the last 3 years in Pakistan. And it was created by the Y Combinator back in 2013. It's a very quick and easy way of raising investment. But at the same time, in this, so like the name says, simple agreement for future equity. So you take capital from the company, but you do not award any shares or equity to that investor. So in that situation, and then in your safe, so there are four types of safes: is a post-money safe, a pre-money safe, a safe with a discount, or a safe with an MFN, most favored nation clause. So I'm not going to go into more detail about that because, like I said, that's another completely other topic on its own. So a safe investment is quicker for startups in raising capital. And then in that, whatever the maturity event is defined, that in the next price round, that when the company is, that's when the safe will convert, and the safe investors will get shares based on whatever the terms of your safe are. Moving forward, now convertible note is a little bit similar to a safe, but in that situation, a convertible note is where your investor has the option of one. So, for example, like let's say a person has invested $100,000 in your company, right? And then they've kept that, hey, when this convertible note, so when it's maturing, so the investor now has the option. Let's say they say after 6 months it will convert. Now, what will it convert to? It will either convert into shares after 6 months, that the 100,000 they invested in, or if the investor wants, he can convert that into debt. And after 6 months, he's like, I'm not feeling comfortable, or whatever reason that I don't want to invest it further in your company. The 100,000 I invested in you, will treat that as debt, and then you just return that back to us. So obviously, in that situation, whatever the terms are, maybe they might charge interest on you, maybe they may not charge interest on you. So it can have a different number of factors. And then last but not least, is another type of investment model is venture debt. This is something that's not too popular in Pakistan because this is something that's done by maybe different venture capitals and that who are investors in the company or through different banks who are doing venture capital investments. So this is something that's not popular in Pakistan at the moment, but still it is a type of investment model. And because of the current funding winter that's been going on, this is venture debt is something that a lot of startups around the world are looking towards in terms of raising investment. All right, so I believe this is one of the last slides in our talk, and we're just going to be wrapping up and opening up for questions. So you want to ensure that what you're doing in your startup, you are complying, you're not making any mistakes. So the first legal do is that you want to have your necessary agreements and contracts in place and written contracts in place, mind you. So you want to have your founders agreement, you want to have your shareholders agreement, employment agreement, intellectual property assignments, or all of that. Now, the biggest problem and the biggest mistake that a lot of people make in the beginning, startup founders, that they copy paste agreement from Google. So I do understand that some agreements, like maybe a non-disclosure agreement, you can find a good draft and template for it, and you can use that, and it might not be detrimental to you. But if you're looking at a services agreement, right? So all of these agreements that you get on Google as templates, they're good templates to just read and understand what they are, but it's not a one size fits all because every business is different. Every business has different arrangement that they are going through, and all the terms are different. So you want to ensure that you're not copy pasting it. It may end up being a big problem for you. And then also another don't is please don't make oral agreements. Whatever you're going to do, be it even between your founders, you have everything written down, because at the end of the day you do not want to be in a battle where it's he said and she said. You don't want to get into that. You want to meet your statutory compliances. Don't forget to ignore or sideline your legal obligations and regards to tax or corporate laws. Research on the intellectual property and the brand that you're creating, the logo that are you, and make sure that you don't infringe on somebody else's IPs. You're not copying an existing brand or maybe an existing logo of somebody, right? Always plan ahead and ensure that your startup is due diligence ready, right? You are ready for an investor coming in and conducting due diligence. And obviously, it's pretty basic thing. Don't avoid your taxes. Don't avoid paying them. Don't ignore your intellectual property registrations. Don't slack on maintaining business and financial accounts. So you want to ensure that these are just some basic legal do's and don'ts that will help you get started out. And obviously all these stuff, if you have all this stuff in order, it will only bring more investor confidence in you, and it will help the investor invest in you faster, because an investor loves nothing more than seeing a startup who has all of their I's dotted and T's crossed, right? So you want to ensure that all of that stuff is happening. And with that, I thank you all for like coming in and listening to this talk. So that's the end of our talk, and I believe we're also running out of almost out of time. So Ali, should we open the floor to questions?
Uh, yeah, I think there are like a lot of questions in the chat box. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe
All right.
do you want me to read, or do you want to read? I think we can start from the very top and just go down.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good. That sounds good. All right, so I think one of the first questions is the company is already registered as a sole proprietor. Can it be changed to a single member company anytime? Yes, at any time you can switch that to, even if so, your sole proprietorship will be registered with the Federal Board of Revenue, and your single member company will be registered with the Security and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. The two different government departments, and obviously whatever the assets that you may have built in your as being a sole proprietor, all of that can be transferred to your single member company later on at any point in time. uh, can we go for a change in legal structure after getting a conversion of an investor? Absolutely, you can. There's no bar in that. So if you're a single member company, you can convert to a private limited company. Nothing, and that's a problem. Can a private limited company receive foreign grants, local donations, crowdfunding? Foreign grants, yes, you may. Local donations and so crowdfunding is something that the SECP has clarified that they don't allow. That's something that the regulations have not been created. So that's something that it's not won't be. And if you are seen to be sourcing crowdfunding, and if you're caught doing that, that will become a problem for you. All right. Should I go through all of the questions, or I think I'll just go through the ones that we haven't covered? What are the post-compliance obligations for a single-member company? So they're pretty similar to what a private limited company is, but they're less. In a private limited company, for example, you have to have your AGM every year. So in a single member company, there's no requirement of having the AGM or filing that. But obviously, in a single member company, if you're transferring your entire shareholding to another person, if you're appointing a nominee director, so all of that stuff does have to happen. And obviously, your financial statements as well, if your paid up capital is more than 10 million.
I think you missed one question right above this one.
How can an impact organization avail the status of NPO in Pakistan? So I'm guessing by NPO, they're assuming that non-profit organization. So in that situation, so that is through your registrar firm. So that's under the joint stock registrar. So that's under, like, you either have a NGO registered or a trust registered or any of that sort. But that's something that since 2017 April, it's something that's not happening because of the FATF crackdown that's happened. So registering an NGO in Pakistan or a charity is something that's become almost a next to impossible task. So a lot of companies, that's why the NGOs, the newly registered NGOs, they're coming into private limited companies, and then they're passing the board resolution that any like funding that they receive, they will not use it for profit purposes. Um, so Anam is asking if one wants to set up a company or startup for national market but started working within Pakistan, is it mandatory to register in Pakistan, or can you so it depends on where your target market is. So if let's say if your operations want to have your operations in Saudi, right? So you will have to incorporate in Saudi to do that. And then obviously if your operations are in Pakistan, you are maybe like your revenue is being generated in Pakistan through your customers or to whatever. So in that situation, you will have to register in Pakistan as well. And then obviously, so it depends on where your operations want to begin and where your customer base, where you want to have your revenue start. So that in that jurisdiction, you will have to incorporate. Investors invest in your local entity, and once the holdco is registered, then that local investor can get the shares registered in the holdco. So that can be done either through a share swap, through a novation agreement. So there are a lot of different legal structures and legal ways that you can get that done. Can we register the holdco under the same name as that of the opco? And can we introduce different stream of businesses through holdco and opco? So for the first part, that yes, you can have the holdco under the same name of the opco, right? But can we introduce different stream of business? So the purpose of the holding company is just to hold shares in your operating company. So the holding companies, they don't do any operations work or any operating work. So for that, you will have to register a different company in whatever different jurisdiction that you are registering in. Does registration of holdco facilitate in terms of issuance of business scalability visa for the employees? Yes. If your holdco is registered in, let's say, Singapore, or maybe in the UAE, then yes, under that you can issue, depending on obviously in the UAE, whatever free zone that you're incorporated in, you can, and how many visas you can issue for your employees or senior management, you can do that. What actions of a company require a board resolution pre-approving that action? So it depends on whatever your situation may be with your investor, that your investor may have reserve matters that he may have, for example, change in the company constitution, changing in the company memorandum, any transfer of shares that is happening, any capital that you guys are raising. So there are a lot of steps that you can have that the investor can also have that will require a board resolution to pre-approve that action. Who decides which committees we need to have and we don't need to have? So that's mainly an internal discussion that you guys have between your co-founders and your investors, and then that's how you go forward. So there's no hard and fast rule to that. So that is something that you can internally decide. And obviously, if there's an investor, that is something you can ask your investor, because they will be able to give away, like, what's the right committees you should have. What is evaluated during due diligence? Any favorite red flags? Yes. So one, in terms of legal, the biggest red flag is maybe the people that who are claiming themselves to be the founders. They don't have their proper equity ownership in the company. The company is not incorporated in the right track. Your memorandum says something else, but you're doing something else. Your financials don't really match up, maybe with your bank accounts or with what you're claiming to be, right? Does company's legal structure matter in case of acquisition? Not so much. Why is safes getting so popular? So now it's an excellent question. So safes are getting popular because, as I mentioned, they're easy and quick way to raise investment. So the transaction documents are less, and it's easier to raise investment. And when you are raising investment through a safe, you are not at that time giving any equity to your investor. So the investor will only get equity in the price term once the safe is being converted, not before that. So it's a quick and easy way to raise investment. Okay, Ali, should I go through all of the other questions as well, or should we just?
If you want to go like 5 minutes, even over the limit, if you can try to.
Okay, yeah, sure. I just wanted to confirm if that's okay. Sure, that's not. So how does the tax structure differ between SMCs and sole proprietorship? Excellent question. Is obviously very important to understand. So in SMC, the tax structure will always be a little bit more because it is a limited liability company. So in that, I believe it's a 19. I'm not sure, okay, in the new budget if there's what it will be, but currently it's 19% is on your profits, and then obviously the other on whatever revenue is. And in terms of the sole proprietorship, it's simple. So whatever the slab that you fall into as sole proprietorship, so let's say if you're making a 600,000 annually, right? So you'll fall into that slab. So whatever slabs you fall into, you just have to pay your tax in sole proprietorship at that sense. Can a sole proprietor receive the following foreign grants, local donations, crowdfunding? No. Foreign grants, be most likely people will not give you a foreign grant if you're a sole proprietor. Local donations as well, no, because there's no a sole proprietorship is not different from a legal entity, right? It's the sole proprietorship and you are the same. So there's no protection in you. There's no protection of the people that may be giving you the grants. So that's something that is a problem. Sidra has asked that if they're a partnership company and there is investment, is it okay to keep the company? So that depends on your investor. If your investor is comfortable in having equity in a partnership firm, having a stake in a partnership firm, that's fine. But generally, it's always advised that you do it through a private limited company, just because you want to ensure that you have the protection of limited liability. Can we register a holdco online? So if your holdco is yes, so there are a lot of different service providers. So let's say in Singapore, in Singapore you can register, and there are different service providers that you can. The favor when we register a company. Well, as I mentioned, we already covered this. You get the protection of limited liability. It's a separate legal entity. So all of these things are that you when and obviously investors when investing, I think that's the biggest favor that you can get when you register a company. Can you share the relevant provision of law that permits private limited companies to receive foreign grants, because my bank is not allowing me to receive? Well, in this situation, you should not tell your bank that whatever capital is coming in is through foreign grant. You should always tell them that it's maybe a partnership with somebody else, or you're working with somebody. So you shouldn't mention, because banks are they're archaic and they're actually still dinosaurs in this aspect. So it would be better that you don't mention that. If you, I believe my email, I think Ali, our company email, you can find it on our website. So you can just reach out to us on that, and I'd be happy to guide you on how to do that. And then, can we apply all this in BMC or freelance agency? I'm sorry, I don't really understand this question. Okay, yeah, I think we're pretty much done with the questions. If there are any more, happy to ask them after the call and I'm on the group. You guys can reach out to me at any time. You guys can reach out to me through email and we're happy to give you advice. Okay, I think this is just the last question that NMS posted and we'll wrap it up. So what legal structure would you advise for a social startup aiming for raising grants? So as I mentioned that you won't be able to register an NGO in Pakistan. It's a difficult process, but legal advice for raising grants and all that, especially from like let's say USAID, DFID, German Institute, and all those places, a private limited company is the best way to go.
So Aksom, just a couple of things on the logistics. One is, can we share your slide deck on the WhatsApp group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then we have recorded the session, so we'll share the recording with everyone to watch again.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. That sounds good. Not an issue at all. Happy to help. And yeah, so and also you can also share my email if people would need that. And happy to answer any questions and even hold office hours in the future.
Can you type it here and then I can also
Sure. Just sure. So I've just for some reason, sorry, it's been directly sent to everyone in meeting. My apologies. All right, so I've sent my email to everyone, as please note this, and you can always reach out to me through email, and whenever possible, we'll reach out to you. And also, as I mentioned, we're happy to have office hours in the future as well. All right.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.